Hello, folks. Welcome back. It's good to have you here with me again. You know, Blake Lively's co-star in It Ends With Us, the one who played Atlas, her childhood sweetheart, and love interest, was Brandon Sklenar. He didn't have a huge role in that film. He was really only in a handful of scenes. But now, Brandon has a brand new movie hitting theaters called The Housemaid, directed by Paul Feig. It's a psychological thriller starring Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried alongside him. Lately, Brandon's been out on the red carpet and doing interviews for the premiere. In some of those conversations, both directly and indirectly, he and Paul Feig have mentioned that Blake Lively played a big part in helping him land this role. Paul has been pretty open about it. He said Blake couldn't stop raving about how great Brandon was to work with after they wrapped It Ends With Us. She recommended him strongly, and that helped get him in the door. But then, in more recent chats, like one on the Today Show, Brandon has also given credit to Sydney Sweeney for advocating for him, and Paul has echoed that too. It's left some folks scratching their heads, wondering why the story seems to shift a bit depending on who's talking. Honestly, it's created quite a buzz. And you have to admit, the timing feels a little curious with everything that's been going on. Before the premiere ramped up, though, no one was shy about it. Paul had openly said he cast Brandon based on Blake's enthusiastic recommendation. Blake herself mentioned suggesting him to Paul, and Brandon had even noted that she told Paul he was easy to work with. Now, we've all heard those stories from the set of It Ends With Us, so easy to work with might mean something different depending on who you ask. But that's a conversation for another day. I have to tell you, when Brandon sat down for that recent interview with The Hollywood Reporter, I was pretty surprised. He really didn't need to bring any of this up again. He had such a small part in It Ends With Us, barely a few days on set. Remember? He showed up at Lily's flower shop in that one odd scene, slipping his phone number into her phone case like some kind of mystery man. Then there was the restaurant bit, and later when she turns up at his place after the trouble with Ryle. Not much screen time, not a ton of dialogue. Yet here he is, stepping right back into the conversation. And do you recall, during all the drama last year, Brandon put out those public statements supporting Blake. He referenced some of that again in this new interview. It was almost like he was positioning himself as a key player, when really, well, he just wasn't in the thick of it on that set. Anyway, before we dive deeper into what he said this time around, let me take you back a bit to last August. That's when Brandon posted quite a lengthy statement on his Instagram, almost as if he were one of the leads in the movie. I caught a lot of attention, and honestly, it felt a little out of place at the time. It felt an awful lot like someone behind the scenes leaned on him and said, "Brandon, could you put out a statement for us? We'd really appreciate it." Because what came next was a long post on his Instagram that read more like a plea than anything else. He wrote something along these lines, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the heart of it was this. I wanted to take a moment to address all the negativity swirling around online. This film, and the women who brought it to life, stand for hope, perseverance, and for women choosing better lives for themselves. Attacking the women who poured their hearts into this movie simply because they believe so deeply in its message, it feels like it works against everything we were trying to say. In fact, it's the opposite of the point. Whatever may or may not have happened behind the scenes shouldn't take away from our intentions. It's been disheartening to watch so much negativity online. Here's something personal. Someone very close to me has been in a relationship that mirrors Lily's story almost exactly. I felt a real responsibility to help bring this film to the screen and spread its message. Before I joined the project, this person had never even heard of the book. Once I got involved, she read it, and she credits Colleen Hoover's novel, and now this movie, with saving her life. Believe me when I say that every single person who worked on this film understood the weight of what we were doing. We carried a responsibility to all the women who've lived through generational trauma, domestic abuse, or the struggle to look in the mirror and truly love who they see. This story is also a wake-up call for men to step up, take responsibility for their actions, and do better. At its core, this film is meant to inspire. It's meant to validate people's experiences, to let them know they're seen. It's meant to build courage, to remind folks they're not alone, and ultimately to spread love and awareness. It is not meant to once again paint women as the villains. So, let's move forward together. Before you post something negative online, pause and ask yourself, who does this help? Is my opinion based on facts, or do I just want to feel part of the conversation? Let's choose to be part of something better, a new chapter for women, and really for all of us. Lead with love, and please, just be kind. Ye ended it by repeating that last line. Lead with love, and please be kind. Now, folks, I've got to be honest with you here. I have a hard time believing the part about his close friend. It came across as a little too convenient, a little too perfectly timed to tug at the heartstrings and shift the focus. And that's just my take, but it's one a lot of people quietly shared when that post first went up. You know, I just couldn't buy that story about his close friend whose life was supposedly saved by the book and the movie. It felt like one of those personal anecdotes that gets added in at the last minute to make the whole thing feel more heartfelt, more urgent. To me, it rang a little hollow, like it was there to pull at our emotions rather than share something genuinely real. And that was the statement Brandon posted back in August. Keep in mind, this came right after Justin Baldoni had made it clear he wasn't going to put out any kind of public defense for Blake or the team. But honestly, why should anyone have felt pressured to defend anybody? The backlash people were talking about wasn't coming out of nowhere. A lot of it stemmed from how Blake handled the promotion, how she seemed to present the film as entirely her own vision. Colleen Hoover's fans, especially the ones who'd followed this project for years, knew full well that Justin had been deeply involved from the very start. He'd helped shepherd it through all the early hurdles, found the financing, kept it alive when it could have fallen apart, even if creative differences popped up toward the end, and even if Blake ended up with final cut. She didn't own the footage, the rights, the equipment, or the sets. She didn't handle permits, insurance, payroll, none of the hundreds of things that actually make a movie happen. Yet during the press tour, it often felt like the narrative was, this is Blake's movie. Full stop. And poor Justin got almost completely sidelined. The rest of the cast rarely, if ever, mentioned him in interviews, which, when you think about it, was pretty unusual. Most ensembles at least give a nod to the director, but not this time. So Brandon, with his very small role and just a few days on set, chose to step in with that big statement. And now, here we are. His new movie, The Housemaid, is having its premiere. Perfect timing, right? Then, when Blake's complaint with the California Civil Rights Department became public, remember, it wasn't a lawsuit. It was a confidential filing with the CRD, styled to look a lot like one when it hit the New York Times. Brandon jumped in again. He posted a link to one of the attachments and wrote something like, "For the love of God, read this. Blake Lively." But here's the thing. Brandon wasn't around for any of the real friction between Blake and Justin. He wasn't on set for the moments that led to those complaints, big or small. He simply wasn't there long enough to witness it firsthand. And yet, he's still weighing in. Which brings us to this brand new interview he just gave to The Hollywood Reporter. Now, I know The Hollywood Reporter has always been pretty favorable toward Blake Lively. But even so, I think it's fair to share what Brandon had to say about his experience. With It Ends With Us. Before that movie, Brandon had solid roles in the Yellowstone universe. He was in both 1923 and The Main Show. Those projects built him a nice following, but they didn't exactly make him a household name overnight. He was respected, sure, but not quite in the spotlight the way some leads are. In this new interview, though, he talks about how working on It Ends With Us felt like a real turning point for him creatively. The article mentions that he carried a certain looseness and freedom into that role, and for the first time, he truly found joy in acting. It's interesting timing, isn't it? Because while he was on set filming those scenes, everything seemed smooth and positive from his vantage point. There were no big issues that he saw firsthand. Of course, later on, With all the legal back and forth between Blake and Justin, the whole thing took on a much heavier feel. But Brandon's point was that during the actual filming, it was a good experience for him. He also opened up about the sudden jump in attention. Even with his smaller part, his visibility exploded. He said there was a steep learning curve adjusting to that level of fame. During the press tour, he posted that Instagram message calling for kindness. Remember, the one asking everyone to focus on the movie's important message about hope and healing, rather than the negativity. He told the reporter, "I wasn't damning anybody. I was just like, can we focus on the ethos of this whole movie and not be so hateful to anyone?" He genuinely thought it was a positive thing to say, a gentle reminder to keep things constructive. But oh my goodness, the response was swift and harsh. He got messages like, "You're a piece of trash. I hope you die. I hope your career ends." Really ugly stuff. His agent, who'd seen a famous client go through something similar, practically begged him to log off social media altogether. Brandon admitted it was tough to stay away. He compared it to walking past a door where 100,000 people are all talking about you. You can't help but put your ear to it and listen, even if you know it might hurt. And here's something we can't overlook. He freely acknowledges that being part of it ends with us. All of it, the good and the controversial, gave his career a massive boost. It opened doors, put him on a bigger stage. He wasn't an A-list leading man before, and his role was limited, as he himself points out. So when you look back at that August statement, it wasn't just a simple call for kindness or a neutral defense of the film's message. A big part of it circled around pushing back against the criticism aimed at Blake, the very co-star whose strong recommendation helped land him this exciting new lead role in these. Housemaid. It does make you pause and think about the layers there, doesn't it? You know, a lot of the online frustration wasn't really aimed at Colleen Hoover herself. At least not as much as it was at Blake and the way the movie was handled. Colleen did get some pushback, though. Fans and critics had been telling her for years, even before the film was made, that the story risked glorifying domestic violence rather than shining an honest light on it. And Colleen really didn't care for that feedback. It stung, and she pushed back hard. Here's where I think things get tricky in Hollywood, and I've seen this pattern before. Sometimes creators get so caught up in their vision that they truly believe they've captured exactly what America needs to hear. They pour their hearts into it, convinced the message is clear and helpful. But then folks like you and me, regular people living in the real world, without the big budgets or the powerful connections, we watch it and say, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. We see a story that's sanitizing the horror of abuse. It makes the cycle look almost romantic at times. It downplays how incredibly hard it is for a woman to finally walk away. And worst of all, it can leave victims feeling confused or even dismissed. Sure, maybe the film helped a handful of people recognize their situation and seek help, and that's worth something. But what about all the survivors who spoke up and said, "This isn't my experience. This makes it look too easy, too forgivable"? Brandon's statement, noble as it sounded on the surface, came across to many as telling those survivors they were being counterproductive for pointing out the problems. It felt like he was all asking them to quiet down so the film's intended message could shine through untouched. And let's be gentle but honest here. The source material itself, the book, had already drawn a lot of criticism for the very same reasons. Many readers felt it spent too much time having Lily justify Ryle's behavior, over and over. Yes, and some women do wrestle with those feelings in real life. That's true and heartbreaking. But in the story, even after everything, after the attempted rape, the physical assaults, being pushed downstairs, Lily still lives with Ryle during her pregnancy. In the end, she agrees to regular custody without ever going to court, without pressing charges, without holding him fully accountable. She brushes it off with, "It doesn't matter." And there's no real consequence for Ryle. No legal reckoning. The story lets him stay closely involved in their daughter's life with very little to protect her from potential future harm. In a roundabout way, it sends a message that he's just broken, that he can't fully help it, and that a strong woman can love him through it. That's why so many domestic violence shelters and advocates raise their voices. They worried it could mislead people about the reality. That leaving safely often involves courts, restraining orders, therapy, support networks, all the hard, messy steps that keep victims and children safe. The film didn't show much of that, and for a lot of folks, that felt like a missed opportunity at best, and harmful at worst. It's a tough conversation, isn't it? But it's one worth having openly and kindly. You see, I think Brandon genuinely believed he was standing up for the women behind the film, and in a way, so for the message it was trying to send. But here's where it gets a little tangled. Most of the criticism coming from the audience wasn't really attacking the women in the cast, or even the idea of telling this story. People were upset about two big things. First, the way Blake seemed to take the reins on the project, and then, during the press tour, barely touched on the domestic violence at the heart of it. It felt like the heavier themes got pushed aside for something lighter, more about fashion and fun than the tough reality the book was supposed to face head-on. Second, there was real frustration over how the story itself handled the abuse. Folks felt it didn't always show the full weight of what survivors go through. Brandon did at least mention the importance of the message in his statement, and I'll give him credit for trying to point people toward kindness. But the truth is, he really didn't need to step into the middle of it all. He had such a small role, just a few days on set, and then months later, boom, he's posting that urgent, for the love of God, read this, about Blake's complaint. It raised a few eyebrows, especially since he wasn't there for any of the key moments that led to all the tension. From what we've heard, Brandon wasn't witnessing things firsthand. Whatever he knew came secondhand, mostly from conversations with Blake and with Colleen Hoover. Apparently, Colleen met with Justin to try and sort some things out, and then, almost right after, she was on the phone with Brandon sharing details. It does make you wonder. Both Colleen and Blake seemed to want more say in how everything unfolded. Colleen, especially. She's always been passionate about her work. And now she's started her own production company and is stepping into producing films herself. It's a natural move, but the timing feels noteworthy. Before all of that, though, before Colleen and Blake were filling him in, Brandon gave a much simpler, warmer interview for the film's promotional materials. It was one of those standard EPK chats, the kind clips get used in trailers and bonus features. The interviewer asked him straight out, "Did you talk to Justin about the role? Did he reach out to you?" And Brandon lit up. He said something like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to piece it all together in my head so it comes out right." What really drew me in was, I didn't even know about the book at first, or how huge it was around the world. Then I had this phone call with Justin, our director, and everything clicked. He helped me understand what the story meant to so many people, men and women, but especially women everywhere, and how it had truly helped them. But honestly, the biggest thing for me was Justin's passion. You could feel it pouring out when he talked about why he wanted to make this film. That's the kind of clear, strong intention that matters when you're creating something worthwhile. He surrounds himself with people who share that same drive. Put all that together, and you've got the best shot at making something meaningful. Something that might touch lives even a fraction as much as the book did. Hearing it straight from him was a real eye-opener for me. You can hear the genuine respect in his voice there. No drama, no sides, just excitement about the project and appreciation for the man steering the ship. It's quite a contrast to where things stand now, isn't it? Well, the interviewer followed up with a great question. You've talked about Justin's passion and intentions ahead of time. How did that actually play out once you were on set? Making the film day to day? Brandon didn't hesitate. He said it showed up in the very feel of the place. It was a really pleasant set to be on. And that tone comes from the top. Our producer, Jamie Heath, is just such a lovely guy, and Justin is so warm. There was no tension at all. It felt open and safe. Exactly what you'd hope for with material this sensitive. And honestly, it's not always like that on movie sets. Sometimes things get tense, and that can either kill the creativity or fuel it. But for a story like this, that calm environment felt essential. I'm truly grateful to Justin for fostering that. It made it a genuinely pleasant experience. Then the interviewer teased him a little. You don't have to say anything nice about Jamie on the record, you know. And they asked about working with the producers. Jamie and, I'm guessing, Alex, probably Alex Sachs, one of the key producers. Brandon laughed it off and said he'd actually had more day-to-day contact with Jamie, but both were great. He circled back to the same point. It's been a really positive work environment. Kind people all around. And again, that starts at the top. Sure, we've had the usual bumps. You know, scheduling changes, location shifts, unexpected hiccups. But I've yet to see anyone lose their temper, throw a clipboard, or raise their voice. Everyone shows up with a smile and keeps their cool. They're just lovely people. Did you catch how he spoke warmly about Jamie and Justin, but kind of glided right over Alex without much detail? It was subtle, but it stood out a little. Here's the important part. This interview happened early on, right after the first phase of filming wrapped. And that first block included almost all of Brandon's scenes. The restaurant confrontation, Lily showing up at Atlas's place after leaving Ryle, pretty much everything with him. We don't even know for sure if Brandon came back for any of the later shooting in the second phase. So, during the exact same period that Blake later described as creating a hostile work environment for her, Brandon, working on the same set under the same director and producers, was calling it one of the most pleasant experiences he'd ever had. Warm, safe, positive, no yelling, everyone smiling. Fast forward to today, and Brandon's talking about how the film gave him tremendous exposure, which it absolutely did, but also how he received awful backlash and death, threats, and how people just didn't grasp the deeper message of the movie. It's quite the shift in perspective, isn't it? Especially when you remember this early interview came before all the private conversations with Blake and Colleen started shaping how he talked about the project. You know, I have to say it straight. No, Brandon. People weren't mad at you because they misunderstood the movie's message. They were upset, rightfully so, because you stepped into a situation you had no business being part of. You picked a side in a conflict you didn't witness firsthand. You told everyone else to calm down and stick to the facts, when, by your own words, you didn't have the full picture either. Remember what you said in that early interview? Jamie and Justin created a warm, positive, safe set. No yelling, no tension. Everyone smiling and professional. And honestly, I believe you. I truly do. It sounds like they were good people running a good ship. So when Blake later described the same environment as hostile and unsafe, it created this jarring contrast. And instead of staying quiet or neutral, you chose to amplify one version, the one that aligned with Blake. That shift is what feels so disappointing. You went from praising the director and producers to quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, backing the narrative that painted them in a different light. And yes, it does seem like Blake's influence played a big part in that change. Whether through private conversations, shared perspectives, or the promise of more opportunities, something shifted in how you spoke about the whole experience. It's sad to watch someone who once sounded so grounded and appreciative suddenly sound like they're reading from a different script. What hurts the most is that it feels like integrity took a backseat. You traded honesty, your own firsthand experience, for something else. Visibility, a bigger spotlight, maybe even a new role that came directly from that connection. And in the end, the pursuit of fame cost you something real. You gave up the truth you lived, the pleasant days on set you described so warmly, all for a version of events you didn't see with your own eyes. And here's the tough part. It didn't even pay off the way you might have hoped. The New York Times review for The Housemaid called your performance bland, said you're generically handsome, but emotionally flat, not particularly memorable. Ouch, that stinks, especially when you put so much on the line. The film has its own stars. Is he carrying the weight? You weren't the big draw they needed. So, all that risk, all that shifting of your story, and the payoff feels pretty thin. It's a reminder, isn't it? Fame can be tempting, but when it comes at the cost of staying true to what you know and what you saw, it leaves a hollow feeling. I feel for Brandon, honestly. I think he got caught up in the whirlwind and lost sight of the steady, decent guy he showed us in that first interview. What do you think, friends? Have you noticed this kind of shift before in Hollywood? Does it make you view Brandon's actions differently now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone. If you enjoyed this deep dive, give the video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks so much for spending this time with me. You're the best. Take care, besties. Bye for now.